Okay, so we are doing really good. Let us get to the bottom of page 20. So Socrates, on the bottom of page 20, is giving a big speech about, not as big as some of his speeches. There's no giant speeches left, but this is one of the larger ones he has towards the end here. He says that oratory is the art of enchanting the soul, and therefore he would be an orator has to learn the differences of human souls. They are so many and of such a nature, and from them come differences between man and man. Having proceeded thus far in his analysis, he will next divide speeches into different classes, right? So first you got to understand people, and after that you got to understand the speeches that they make. He will next divide speeches into different classes. Such and such persons, he will say, are affected by this or that kind of speech in this or that way, and he will tell you why. The pupil must have a good theoretical notion of them first, then he must have experience of them in actual life, and be able to follow them with all his senses about him, or he will never get beyond the precepts of his masters. But when he understands what persons are persuaded by what arguments, and sees the persons about whom he was speaking in the abstract actually before him, and knows that it is he, and can say to himself, this is the man, or this is the character who ought to have a certain argument applied to him in order to convince him of a certain opinion. He who knows all this, and knows also when he should speak and when he should refrain from speaking, and when he should use pithy sayings, pathetic appeals, sensational effects, and all the other modes of speech which he has learned. When, as I say, he knows the times and seasons of all these things, then, and not till then, he is the perfect master of his art. But if he fail in any of these points, whether in speaking or teaching or writing them, yet declares that he speaks by rules of art, he who says, I don't believe you, has the better of him. Well, the teacher will say, is this, and Socrates, your account of the so-called art of the teacher will say, is this, and Socrates, your account of the so-called art of rhetoric, or am I to look for another? So he's defined it. And the crucial thing about the Socrates' kind of definitions, he was talking about those different effects that use on different people. It's just what I was saying earlier. Did a little early about ethos, pathos, logos. Are you going to use emotion? Are you going to use logic? Are you going to use trustworthiness? Are you going to use big words? Are you going to use little words? Are you going to use long sentences? Are you going to use short sentences? Are you going to talk about yourself? Are you never going to talk about yourself? Are you going to talk about movies? What kind of movies? What do the people know? What kind of movies would be good to discuss? What kind of people would be good to quote? So those skills, Socrates says, understanding all of that is behind being a speech maker. All right, cool. He must take this, Socrates, for there's no possibility of another. And yet the creation of such an art is not easy. I mean, you've given a correct definition. It's pretty difficult. And Socrates says, very true. And therefore, let us consider this matter in every light and see whether we cannot find a shorter and easier road. There is no use in taking a long, rough, roundabout way if there be a shorter and easier one. And I wish that you would try and remember whether you have heard from Lysias or anyone else anything which might be of service to us. If trying would avail, then I might, but at this moment I can think of nothing. And this is silly, but Socrates is saying, well, surely Lysias, you know that Lysias must have taught you about this. And Phaedrus is like, no, he didn't teach us about that, because Lysias just teaches you the tricks to use, but he doesn't really understand the soul. He doesn't understand truth. He doesn't understand audience. He doesn't understand all of these the different types of speeches, the organization of the speeches. He's not really doing he's not doing it the right way. He's doing it a kind of weak way. And so Socrates says here at the bottom of 20, suppose I tell you something which somebody who knows told me. Certainly. May not the wolf, as the proverb said, claim a hearing, right? Maybe we should listen to this other person. So Socrates is going to talk about somebody else on page 21. Guys, we're on page 21. I'm sorry, I'm just going to be a huge nerd for a second. Look, we got to get through page 21, and then we're going to get through page 22, page 23, and then we are done. That's it with the entire book. So if you followed me this far, we're really doing a good job making our way through this thing. And actually, it gets especially interesting at the bottom of page 21. My favorite part of the entire book of Phaedrus is the bottom of page 21 to the end. And I think it's really the most interesting part. And I used to teach just that part. I used to give it to students as a separate thing. I didn't teach them the whole book. I only taught them the last 3 pages. But it really is the most interesting part of the entire discussion. So we're going to get there today, and then we're going to really wrap this thing up. And then I'm going to do some videos about David Foster Wallace and Michael Pollan. So if you have a chance to read those, I do recommend you start reading them. It's going to be especially important for you to send me some questions and things about those guys. All right. So Socrates was saying, doesn't the wolf deserve a hearing? That was the thing at the bottom of page 20. Socrates said, there's an old saying, the proverb, the wolf claims a hearing. The wolf is your enemy. A wolf is an animal that if it sees you would rip your throat out and eat your face off. And he says the wolf deserves a hearing. It's an old saying in ancient Greece. Now, you guys actually know a version of this. It's what I call considering objections. The wolf deserves a hearing. Your enemy should get a say. In your paper, consider objections. What would people who objected to you say? And what Socrates is going to do in this next section is he said a lot of stuff about speech making. So he's going to say, you know what, let's think about what Lysias would say to us if he were here. And so he tries to imagine, just like I ask you guys to do in your paper, to consider something. What would someone who objected to you say? Socrates stops and he says, you know what, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to say, here's what he would say. So let's talk about what Lysias says. He will argue that it is no use putting a solemn face on these matters or in going round and round until you arrive at first principles. For as I have said at first, the question is of justice and good. Or is a question in which men are concerned who are just and good either by nature or habit. He who would be a skillful rhetorician has no need of truth. Right. So Lysias would say that if you want to be skilled, he says you have no need of truth. Lysias would say you don't need it. You have no need of truth. For that in courts of law, men literally care nothing about truth, but only about conviction, meaning belief. So they don't care what's in a court of law. Socrates has been talking a lot about truth. And he says, what would happen if let's listen to the wolf, let's listen to our enemy, let's listen to Lysias. I wonder what he would say. And then Socrates imagines what Lysias would say. And he imagines Lysias would say, there's no need for all this nonsense about truth. If you're in a court of law, you're not hunting for the truth. You're just trying to say whatever you can to get your client to go free, or you're just saying whatever you can to get your opponent a guilty verdict. You're talking to a jury to convince them. Who cares about truth? What we care about is, can you get your client off or not? And that's what Lysias would say. Lysias would say it doesn't matter about truth. For in courts of law, men literally care nothing about truth, but only about conviction. And this is based on probability. To which who would be a skillful orator should therefore give his whole intention. So we don't really care about, in the court of law, they don't care about, in probability there means like believability. He says in the court of law, people don't care what's true. They don't care about what's true. They just care about, they don't care about what's true. They just care about what do you have to say to get someone to agree with you? What do you have to say to be believable? That's what I wanted to say. I messed it up a little bit. Now I'm back. It says people in court of law, they don't care what's true. They just care about what's believable. So don't tell them what's true. Tell them what they'll believe in. Tell them probability, right? If something is likely, they will believe that. If it is unlikely, if you tell a story and it sounds about right, people will believe you. If you tell a story and it sounds crazy, they won't believe you. Now, did it really happen or not? Well, they don't care about that. They just want to hear a story they're going to believe in. So you tell the jury something they'll believe in. And so he says that Lysias would say people in court, and by the way, this is amazing to me too, that Socrates says, for in courts of law, men literally care nothing. This is Socrates saying what Lysias would say. For in courts of law, men literally care nothing about truth, but only about conviction. I think that's true in a modern day court of law too, right? That modern day lawyers, it's not the truth isn't the issue. The issue is, can you get people to believe it? It'd be interesting, by the way, in your papers to talk about sort of a modern courtroom drama, talk about like a Law and Order episode or situation. That might be something interesting to write about. If I still had you physically, I would be interested. Maybe we could watch like a Law and Order, a movie about lawyers arguing over something. Now I'm wondering if that actually would make the most amount of sense for this class. One lawyer looking for the truth, and the other lawyer just saying whatever it takes to win. All right, I'm gonna think about that more. I'll see you guys in the next video.